Hello, everyone. My name is Eddie Bolen. I'm a pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I'm also a pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this video. This video is going to be a reflection on Mother's Day weekend is what I'm going to be offering. And I want to start with kind of a part of my own life and part of my own journey. Growing up, I never really spent all that much time around mountains and trails. I spent a little bit of time out hiking, but just not a lot. Really didn't know what to expect when you're around mountains. Didn't know too much about what to expect when you were around different trails and what you might encounter in those mountainous regions or some of those trails that we have plenty of in Alabama, as well as all the adjacent states that are around us. But I did know, I did spend some time around lakes. I knew what to do around lakes. I knew to watch out. I knew what to expect. I knew to stay away from and what to watch out. Water moccasins. I knew those snakes that you see like that, to stay away from them. I know venomous snakes. I also knew on the baseball field, I knew, when you're playing baseball, you don't crowd the plate. I mean, you stay away from the plate, especially when there's a really good pitcher. So, I said that this is going to be reflections on Mother's Day, and already I've mentioned mountains, I've mentioned trails, I've mentioned lakes, and I've mentioned baseball. But having children of my own, and coming to that place of having children of my own, and taking them to mountains, taking them along trails, and I think mostly about my children when we were growing up and going on those trails as much as you can go on trails with toddlers. It was my wife. It was my wife who really told me stories of what you might expect in the mountains. And primarily, overwhelmingly, bears. And most importantly, she said the places where you might expect, that you probably wouldn't expect to see bears, around parking lots, around the corners of buildings, bears that were trying to get into dumpsters, bears that you may not see at night, just where you might see them, where you may not see them, and around the side of the road if you look real closely. And also, if you pay enough attention, if you look up into trees, you will oftentimes on those trails and around those areas that are very close throughout Tennessee, that you might find bear cubs in those trees. And my wife also importantly said that as cute and as adorable and as picturesque as those bear cubs may be when they are in the tree, who else do you know that is always close by? Now, you probably already know this, but it was something that, honestly, I hadn't thought too much about. And certainly that when those bear cubs are there and you are close enough to see them, certainly there is one that is close enough to touch you if you take one more step to them. And you all know it. You know exactly where I'm getting to. And this is the Mother's Day part of my reflection and part of what I'm offering to you on this video. That is right, that as you see those bear cubs, the mama bear is very close behind. The mama bear is right there and ready to guard her cubs if you take one step toward them. And again, it was my own wife that told me that. I learned that from my wife's experience. But it's not only mama bears. It's not only bears. But for our own mothers and all those who have great, big, gracious, and generous hearts, who love us the way our own mothers do. There is something that is extraordinarily amazing about what mothers will do, and also about how far mothers will go. We see that about bears and even make jokes about mama bears. But for our own mothers and those people who love us with those great big hearts like our own mothers, we see how far they will go. There's a very old quote that comes out. I was meeting with a group of folks just this past week, and they reminded me of it and said, really, when we think about Mother's Day weekend, when we talk about Mother's Day weekend, every day is Mother's Day. And that's what I'm talking about. That idea is what I'm speaking about today. And I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine a mother that is taking a risk and calling upon someone who is just passing through town and asking for that complete stranger, asking for that person to grant mercy to her. And as much as it may sound like a plot to a country or western movie, it's not. It's a story that is in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. It's a story of a Canaanite woman encountering Jesus who was just passing through. And you can find that story again in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew in the New Testament, particularly if you take a look at Matthew chapter 15 in the New Testament, starting at verse 21, going through verse 28, you can find that story. And I heard someone that was just just a few days ago that was just talking about this, and they were talking about a professor of literature that they had who said, there are really only two kinds of plots in all of literature. Either someone is leaving town or a stranger is coming to town. And this is one. This is a story in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. The story of Jesus and the Canaanite woman is that Jesus is coming into town. Jesus is not really a complete stranger to the Canaanite woman who is vying for his attention. Jesus has taught, and Jesus has this reputation of teaching that is extraordinarily inclusive to people. In fact, Jesus is a person who has reached out and extended God's healing and God's presence in healing to people who were far away from God. And also Jesus is beginning to garner this reputation of being someone who eats with very poor people, people that are almost at the point of being destitute, people who are begging on the side of streets, people who do not have their own homes, do not have their own shelters. And also Jesus has been found eating with complete sinners, people that are far away from God. And in one of Jesus' most significant teaching moments, called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins with this declaration of people who are blessed. And what Jesus says in Matthew, this is again in the Gospel according to Matthew, but earlier, before this story of Jesus' encounter with the Canaanite woman, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7, when he's offering just this long list of people who are blessed by God, he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." And this is the cry that Jesus will hear from this Canaanite woman in Matthew chapter 15, verse 22. "Have mercy on me." Jesus says, "Blessed are those who are merciful, for they will receive mercy." And then Jesus hears this Canaanite woman, complete stranger to Jesus, come to him and say, "Have mercy on me," in Matthew chapter 15, 22. And I wonder as much emphasis as we have in our teaching, what's it like to be confronted with our own teaching by a complete stranger that comes to us? And this is exactly what is happening with Jesus. The mercy that is sought by this Canaanite woman is not for her, but it is, in fact, for her daughter. You see, we learn that she's a mother, and she has a daughter, and it's a mother who is crying out for her daughter, who is, in the mother's own words, who is tormented by a demon. And it's one of the realities of this weekend that even on Mother's Day, that mothers and those who love us like mothers seek mercy for daughters and also seek mercy for sons that are tormented by demons. This is, in fact, the mercy that she is seeking for her own daughter, mercy against a demon that has been tormenting her daughter. Again, her own words. How could she not ask for mercy on behalf of her daughter? The prophet Jeremiah will describe his own encounter, and just a tremendous encounter that he has with God, where God begins to completely shape his life and call him to do something that is extraordinarily significant, to the call to actually become a prophet who will speak, which is what prophecy is, speaking on behalf of God. In Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5, Jeremiah, in his own reflection about this calling that God has placed on his life, he says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations." That idea that Jeremiah says that as an adult and as a man who is being called by God, he says that God, before he was even formed in the womb, that God knew him. Before he was even born, that God had chosen a path for Jeremiah to take. And while God knows all of us intimately and forming us and shaping us in the womb, just consider who it is that carries us in that womb. It's our own mothers, and it's this mother who is crying for mercy. "Free my daughter from this evil that is tormenting her." And it's the mother who Jesus will not respond to immediately. It's the disciples in response to the mother who will advise Jesus, will send her away, Jesus. Again, Matthew chapter 15. This is verse 23 in this story. But the disciples, Jesus' closest followers, will say to Jesus, send her away, for she keeps shouting at us. And it's likely no surprise that she would keep shouting. Likely no surprise to any of us that she would maybe be ignored by the disciples. And it's easy for all of us to ignore shouts and cries for mercy, and this kind of this kind of response. My daughter has this evil demon that is tormenting her. It's easy, especially when you're only passing through and the needs to seem to be so great. We also encounter wrapped around Matthew chapter 5 as we get to see a picture of Jesus' life. We see really how often Jesus will have people that come to him and surrounding him. It's easy to imagine how Jesus may be worn out. It's easy for us to begin to get a sense of seeing that how Jesus might be overwhelmed by what he continues to encounter. And maybe it is that her mother really expected too much in this moment. Maybe it is her mother who expected too much from Jesus in this moment. I mean, what are, in fact, the chances that Jesus would hear her as Jesus is passing through? What are the chances that Jesus would even respond? Really, how far is it that mothers are willing to go? And in fact, how far would you go toward the ones that you love as daughters and sons when you see them going down a path that is filled with evil and torment? She moves from asking for mercy. This is what I think is just extraordinary about this story, is that she moves from asking for mercy, continues to shout, and in the midst of these rebuked by the disciples who are walking with Jesus, she takes her place and she kneels down before Jesus, closing that physical distance and forcing a response from Jesus. Finally, as she kneels in front of Jesus, she says, "Lord, help me." As again, Matthew chapter 15, verse 25, we have her exact words. We have her verbatim account of what she says. 3 words kneeling before Jesus. Already, Jesus has said 3 words as she kneels before Jesus, "Lord, help me." Already, Jesus, before she even reaches this point of kneeling, Jesus says, "I've been sent. In fact, I was sent, not only that I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." And I mean, how overwhelming is it for all of us to experience such great needs that are all around us? We read of crowds, in fact, who will be following Jesus when he tries to get away and just spend some time in prayer. That they'll go after him. They'll find those deserted places, those out of the way places, those places that are off the path, and they will find Jesus. Crowds who are filling houses with Jesus so much that even the front door is blocked. And the extent that people will go through that, although they can't go into the front door, they begin to tear the roof off of the house and lower a man down so that he can be in the presence of Jesus. Jesus, who has come to the people of God. This is what Jesus says as she kneels in front of him, that before she even reaches that place, in response to her shouts, he says, "I have come. I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But stopped in his tracks, closing that physical space that is between Jesus, the disciples, as well as this Canaanite woman, confronted by a mother who is kneeling in front of him, asking for help, not for the mother's help, but for help on behalf of her daughter. Kneeling down, a mother with a daughter who's being tormented refuses to hear these words from Jesus and says, "It's not fair. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs," is what Jesus says to her. Now, I'm certain that you do not need an education in the cultural background of the first century Mediterranean world to know precisely who the children are in Jesus' response, and to know who the dogs are in Jesus' words as he responds to this woman who is saying, "Lord, help me." It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Such biting indictment leads to the mother's own retort. And again, should we expect anything less from a mother? Because this Canaanite woman and this mother who has a daughter who is being tormented by an evil demon, an evil spirit that is there, says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Shouting, kneeling, and biting back with her own rhetoric, her own response. "Master, Lord, just a crumb for the table for this dog," is what she in fact asked from Jesus. And again, would you expect anything less to come from a mother? You know, David will reflect on this. Another just important reflection that a king will make. In Psalm 139, will reflect on his own life, comes to express what he knows about God and how each of us are created by God. For he will say in his own prayers and his own reflections, "For it was you who formed me in my inward parts. You, God, are the one who knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my uniform substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you." That's from Psalm 139. Its particular verses are verse 14 through 18. For this particular Canaanite woman, she was willing to risk everything for her daughter, who was fearfully and wonderfully made. You see, that tormented demon that she had, that demonic spirit that had captured her, did nothing to reduce the fact that she was fearfully and she was wonderfully made by God. And she comes to Jesus on her knees, asking for help, and then just asking for just a few scraps, the crumbs from the table, like a dog who is sitting under the table. And it's to this that Jesus says, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And as the story comes to an end, we find that her daughter is healed. She's healed by God. She's healed by the very presence of Jesus in her life. It is her faith that has brought that healing encounter that comes into her life. And mothers and all of us who love our children as mothers, do not give up your faith. For those who are tormented, for those who are battling demons, do not give up your faith. For those who that all of us know and love, whether we're mothers or not mothers, but for all those, because this is one of the things that all of us can do, for all those that we know and love who are facing conditions that are far too embarrassing to name out loud, do not give up your faith, for you're fearfully and wonderfully made children. And we know that there are many different ways that we can embrace people, that although they may not be our biological children, they are really children of faith to us. Do not give up. Do not give up that faith that we have for them. Shout and kneel and confront, but whatever you do, do not give up that great faith that is within you, because this is the very thing that Jesus recognized in the life of a Canaanite woman and in the life of a mother who had a daughter who was being tormented by an evil demon in her life. One of the biggest encouragements that I have is when I am able to gather with people of faith, when I am able to see people of faith come together, and when I am able to see people of faith come together in what are very tragic circumstances at times, when I am able to hear people of faith who are praying fervently for sons and daughters who are tormented by demons, it is the great encouragement that I have, because I know that it is those people who are committed to not giving up their faith that God sees and that God recognizes. And it is out of that faith that I'm reminded that there is great faith that we all bring together. And If you are a mother or someone that is loving like a mother, if you are someone whose heart is being broken by someone who is in a particular place where they are being tormented by a demon, where they are being tormented in their own life, someone like a son or a daughter, someone that you love like a son or a daughter, do not give up your faith. Do not give up the kind of faith. Do not be afraid to shout. Do not be afraid to kneel. Do not be afraid to ask for scraps, to ask for crumbs off of the table. Because it is that kind of faith that we see is rewarded by God. It is that kind of faith that is rewarded by Jesus Christ. Well, I do hope that you have a blessed Mother's Day weekend and pray that it is a safe weekend. And I thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this video. May God's blessings be upon all of you, both now and forevermore. Amen.